Maxwell Harrington stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse, watching the city below through rain-streaked glass. 50 stories up, the world looked like a miniature model. Tiny cars crawling along gray streets, people reduced to moving dots. From this height, everything seemed manageable, controllable, unlike his life. He pressed his forehead against the cool glass and closed his eyes. The board meeting had run late again. Another day when he'd missed dinner with Eliza. Mr. Harrington, a soft voice interrupted his thoughts. Would you like to say goodnight to your daughter? She's still awake. Maxwell turned to face Mrs. Chen, the night nurse. Her kind eyes held no judgment, but he felt the weight of it anyway. Of course, he said, straightening his tie out of habit. I'll go now. The hallway to Eliza's room was long and quiet, its walls lined with artwork he'd purchased but never really looked at. Museum-quality pieces that experts had assured him would appreciate in value. Everything in his life was an investment, except for the one thing money couldn't fix. He paused outside her door, hearing the soft beep of machines. 10 years ago, when they'd placed his newborn daughter in his arms for the first time, he'd made her a promise. I'll give you the world, he'd whispered. Back then he'd believed he could. Dad? Eliza's voice called from inside, somehow knowing he was there. Maxwell pushed open the door and smiled. Hey, Firefly. Eliza lay propped against pillows in her custom bed, medical equipment neatly arranged nearby. Despite everything, her eyes lit up when she saw him. Clear blue eyes that looked so much like her mother's it sometimes hurt to look directly at them. You're home early, she said. It was nearly 10 o'clock. I'm sorry about dinner, he replied, sitting carefully on the edge of her bed. The Tokyo deal was complicated. Did you win? She always framed business as a game. We did. He touched her hand, so small and pale against the colorful quilt. How was your day? Eliza shrugged. Mrs. Chen helped me with science. We looked at pond water under my microscope. She pointed to her desk where the expensive equipment sat. There are whole worlds in there, Dad. Tiny creatures swimming around that don't even know we exist. Maxwell nodded, wondering how it felt to have your entire world contained in a drop of water, or a luxurious bedroom. Also, she continued, her voice brightening, I watched 3 dogs playing in the park. The spotted one could catch a ball in midair. His chest tightened. Her window overlooked Central Park, a sprawling green space she had only experienced through glass. The doctors had been clear about her condition. The rare neuromuscular disorder meant her legs couldn't support her weight. The most advanced wheelchairs could take her anywhere in the building, but the unpredictable terrain of the outside world presented too many risks. That sounds amazing, he said, trying to match her enthusiasm. When can I go there? She asked, the question she'd been asking more frequently lately. Soon, he lied, the way he always did. When you're stronger. Eliza's smile dimmed just slightly. At 10, she was starting to understand what soon really meant. Ms. Rivera quit, she said, changing the subject. Maxwell frowned. What when? This afternoon. She was crying. That explained the 3 missed calls from his house manager. Greta Rivera had been with them for nearly 2 years, longer than most staff managed to stay. Did she say why? Eliza picked at a loose thread on her quilt. She said she couldn't do it anymore. That looking after me was too... She paused, searching for the right word. Complicated. Maxwell felt a flash of anger. How dare Rivera quit without notice? And to say something like that within Eliza's hearing? That's not true, he said firmly. You're not complicated. You're extraordinary. Eliza's smile returned but didn't quite reach her eyes. Time for sleep, he said, tucking the covers around her. Will you be here for breakfast? The hope in her voice was painful. I'll try, he said, knowing he had an early meeting. After kissing her goodnight, Maxwell stepped into the hallway and pulled out his phone. Get me a new caretaker, he snapped when his assistant answered. Top credentials. Start interviewing tomorrow. Sir, this will be the 4th this year, his assistant said cautiously. Perhaps we should consider... Just do it, Maxwell interrupted. Money is no object. Find someone who won't quit when things get difficult. After hanging up, he stood outside Eliza's door, listening to the quiet sounds of her settling into sleep. The truth was, money had always been his solution. When doctors said Eliza's condition was inoperable, he'd funded research centers dedicated to finding new treatments. When specialists suggested equipment to help her mobility, he'd purchased everything available and hired engineers to design more. His penthouse contained medical technology that most hospitals couldn't afford, yet none of it had made a real difference. His daughter remained imprisoned by her body and by these walls, and no amount of money could buy what she truly wanted: to feel grass beneath her feet, to throw bread to ducks in the pond, to do what every other child took for granted. Maxwell walked to his home office and poured himself a drink, the expensive whiskey burning his throat. The city lights twinkled beyond the windows, a view worth millions that brought him no joy. His phone buzzed with an email. The subject line read, "Regarding caretaker position." Normally he left hiring to his staff, but something made him open it. The message was brief. "My name is Claire Thompson. I understand you're looking for someone to care for your daughter. I don't have impressive degrees or celebrity references. What I do have is experience with difficult cases and a belief that impossible is just a word people use when they stop trying. I'm available to interview tomorrow morning." Maxwell almost deleted it. He had specialists from the best universities, nurses trained at top hospitals. He didn't need someone with no credentials. But something in the email's directness caught his attention. Or perhaps it was the word impossible, a word he'd been hearing too often lately. He forwarded the email to his assistant with a note. "Add her to tomorrow's interviews. First thing." The next morning, Maxwell sat in his private conference room as candidates came and went. Each was perfectly qualified on paper. Each spoke of Eliza's condition in careful clinical terms. Each assured him they could manage her care with minimal disruption to his schedule. By noon, he'd seen 7 candidates and felt no closer to finding someone who would stay. "One more, sir," his assistant said, opening the door. The woman who walked in wasn't what Maxwell expected. No designer clothes or perfectly styled hair, just simple pants and a button-up shirt, with her dark hair pulled back in a practical knot. She carried only a worn leather satchel. "Mr. Harrington," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Claire Thompson." Her handshake was firm, her gaze direct. No nervous energy or excessive politeness. "Your email was unusual," he began, studying her face. She appeared to be in her mid-30s, with laugh lines around her eyes and a steadiness in her expression that seemed almost challenging. "I believe in being direct," she replied, sitting only when he did. "You've likely interviewed people with better qualifications today." "Then why should I hire you?" Claire leaned forward slightly. "Because I don't see your daughter as a condition to be managed. I see her as a child whose world is too small." Maxwell felt a flicker of irritation. "You know nothing about my daughter. I know she watches the park from her window. I know she's had 4 caretakers this year alone, and I know that everyone around her is focused on what she can't do." "Her condition is serious," Maxwell said stiffly. "Yes," Claire agreed, "and so is spending your childhood watching the world instead of living in it." No one spoke to him this way. He should end the interview immediately. Instead, he found himself asking, "What makes you qualified to care for someone with her needs?" "I worked with a boy in Singapore who doctors said would never communicate. He's in regular classes now. Before that, I was with a family in Colorado whose daughter had a similar condition to Eliza's. When I left, she could stand for almost a minute unassisted." "Those claims are easy to make and hard to verify," Maxwell pointed out. Claire smiled slightly. "True, that's why I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking for 1 week. If you don't see a difference in your daughter by then, I'll leave and you'll never hear from me again." Maxwell should have said no, should have continued searching for someone with proper credentials and professional boundaries. But he thought of Eliza asking when she could visit the park. Thought of the hope in her voice when she asked if he'd be there for breakfast. 1 week, he agreed, surprising himself. "Starting tomorrow." Claire nodded and stood up. "One more thing, Mr. Harrington." "Yes?" "If this works, it won't be because of me. It will be because your daughter is stronger than anyone has allowed her to be." As Claire left, Maxwell remained seated, wondering if he'd just made a terrible mistake or taken the first step toward something impossible. The next morning, Maxwell lingered over breakfast, something he hadn't done in years. He told himself it was to observe Claire's first day, not because he was worried about the decision he'd made. "Dad?" Eliza looked up from her barely touched oatmeal. "Aren't you late for work?" "I moved some things around," he said, checking his watch. Nearly 8:30. His phone had been buzzing with messages from the office for the past hour. "Because of the new lady?" Eliza asked, too perceptive for her age. "Partly," he admitted. "I want to make sure she's good enough for you." The elevator chimed, announcing an arrival. Maxwell rose from the table as his house manager, Mrs. Winters, entered the dining room. "Ms. Thompson is here, sir," she announced, her expression carefully neutral. Maxwell had known Mrs. Winters long enough to recognize her disapproval. "Show her in," he said, straightening his tie. Claire entered carrying the same worn leather satchel from yesterday. She wore simple clothes again, jeans and a soft blue sweater, practical for someone who would be helping a child. "Good morning," she said, her eyes going straight to Eliza. "You must be the famous Eliza Harrington." Eliza frowned slightly. "I'm not famous, no. I was told you could name all the constellations and that you've read more books than most adults. That sounds pretty famous to me." Maxwell watched his daughter's face brighten with surprise. Who had told Claire these things? He certainly hadn't mentioned them in the interview. "Mr. Harrington," Claire nodded to him. "I wasn't expecting you to be here. I thought I'd stay for a while, to help with the transition." "That won't be necessary," she replied, setting her satchel on an empty chair. "In fact, it would be better if Eliza and I had some time to get acquainted on our own." He bristled at being dismissed in his own home. "I'd prefer to—" "Dad," Eliza interrupted. "It's okay. You can go to work." Maxwell hesitated. He had meetings scheduled all day, important ones he couldn't miss. But leaving Eliza alone with a stranger felt wrong, even with the house staff nearby. Claire seemed to sense his concern. "Why don't we agree on a check-in time? You can call at noon to see how things are going." "I want to know what your plans are for today," he said, trying to regain some control. "We're going to start by getting to know each other," Claire answered. "Beyond that, I prefer to follow Eliza's lead. Eliza has physical therapy at 11. Her tutor comes at 2 for lessons." Claire nodded. "We'll work around those appointments." Maxwell looked at his daughter, who gave him an encouraging smile. "It's okay, Dad, really." With reluctance, he gathered his things. At the elevator, he turned back. "I'll call at noon. We'll be here," Claire assured him. As the elevator doors closed, Maxwell had the distinct feeling he'd just been outmaneuvered. Throughout his morning meetings, Maxwell found it hard to focus. He checked the security app on his phone repeatedly, watching the camera feeds from the apartment. He saw Claire and Eliza in the library, then in the music room. Nothing seemed amiss, but he couldn't shake his unease. At exactly noon, he stepped out of a budget review and called home. "Harrington Residence," Mrs. Winters answered. "Put Eliza on, please," Maxwell said. "One moment, sir." There was a pause. Then Mrs. Winters returned to the line. "Sir, Miss Thompson asked if you can call back in 15 minutes. They're in the middle of something." Maxwell felt a flash of anger. "This is my scheduled call." "Put my daughter on the phone." Another pause. "I'm sorry, sir. They're not in a position to come to the phone right now." "What does that mean?" "Where are they?" "In Miss Eliza's bathroom, sir. Miss Thompson is— well, she's changing how the room is arranged. Put Claire on the phone now." His voice was tight with control. A moment later, Claire's voice came through. "Mr. Harrington, we're a bit busy at the moment." "What are you doing to my daughter's bathroom?" he demanded. "Making it more accessible," she replied calmly. "Eliza told me she wants to be able to brush her teeth without help, so we're adjusting things." "That bathroom was designed by specialists," Maxwell said. "Everything is already at the optimal height for her wheelchair." "For her current wheelchair, yes. But she's growing, and there are other options we might try. Listen, can we call you back in a few minutes? Eliza's really excited about this project." In the background, he could hear his daughter's voice, animated in a way he rarely heard. "Fine." He relented. "But I expect a full explanation later." He returned to his meeting, but couldn't concentrate. 30 minutes passed with no callback. Finally, his private line rang. "Dad!" Eliza's voice burst through the speaker. "You have to see what we did. I can reach the sink now without having to use that stupid stool thing." Despite his irritation, Maxwell felt his mouth twitch toward a smile. "That's great, Firefly. And Claire says we can do my closet next. She says I should be able to pick out my own clothes." "Does she now?" "Uh-huh. And guess what else? She knows all about the stars, too. She showed me this app that lets you see the constellations even in daytime. We're going to use it tonight to find Perseus because that's her favorite." Maxwell listened as his daughter chatted excitedly, a stream of words unusual for her typically reserved nature. "It sounds like you're having fun," he said when she paused for breath. "The best day," Eliza confirmed. "When are you coming home?" The question caught him off guard. Normally he returned well after her bedtime. I have meetings until late tonight. Oh, the disappointment in her voice was clear. Claire's going to teach me a card game after dinner. She says it helps with hand strength. That sounds nice, he said, checking his watch. I should get back to my meeting now. Okay, bye, Dad, love you. Love you too, he replied, but she had already hung up. The rest of the day dragged on. By the time Maxwell arrived home, it was past 10. The penthouse was quiet as he stepped off the elevator. Mrs. Winters appeared to take his coat. How did it go? He asked. Mrs. Winters pressed her lips together. Miss Thompson has unusual methods, sir, meaning she moved furniture without permission. She replaced Miss Eliza's afternoon lessons with what she called practical skills training, and she played music far too loudly during physical therapy. Maxwell frowned. Where is she now? Gone for the day, sir. She left at 8 after putting Miss Eliza to bed. He nodded. And Eliza? How was she? Something softened in Mrs. Winters' expression. I haven't seen her so animated in a long time, sir. But I worry Miss Thompson is giving her unrealistic expectations. Maxwell walked to Eliza's room and quietly pushed open the door. His daughter was fast asleep, her breathing deep and even. Beside her bed, where medical textbooks usually sat, he found a stack of library books about astronomy and world exploration. A small globe that hadn't been there before sat on her nightstand. He carefully closed the door and went to his office. On his desk was a handwritten note. Mr. Harrington, Eliza had a good day. She pushed herself during physical therapy, managed to stand supported for nearly 10 seconds. I've adjusted her bathroom as you heard. Tomorrow we'll work on upper body strength and practical independence skills. The therapist's exercises are excellent but too clinical. Eliza needs to see the purpose behind the work. She's eager to learn. Also, she mentioned wanting to show you the Constellation app. Perhaps you could make time for that tomorrow evening. Claire. The note's directness matched its author. Maxwell poured himself a drink and stood by the window, looking out at the park where Eliza wanted so badly to go. The lights of the city reflected in the dark glass, creating the illusion that the stars had come down to eye level. The next morning, he deliberately scheduled his first meeting for 9, allowing him to have breakfast with Eliza again. He found her already at the table, Claire beside her, showing her how to spread jam on toast. I'm doing it myself, Dad, Eliza announced proudly as he entered. I can see that, he said, taking in the scene. There were crumbs and smears of jam on the table, but Eliza's face shone with accomplishment. Claire looked up. Good morning, Mr. Harrington. We're working on fine motor skills. So I see, he replied, taking his usual seat. I got your note, and? Her direct gaze met his. Eliza's previous caretakers followed the program her doctors prescribed. They didn't make unauthorized changes, Claire nodded. And how much progress did she make with them? The question hung in the air between them. The truth was, despite years of therapy, Eliza's improvements had been minimal. Dad, can you come home early tonight? Eliza asked, changing the subject. Claire says we can look at stars from my balcony if it's clear. I have a dinner meeting, he began automatically. It's just for 15 minutes, she pressed. Please. Maxwell looked at his daughter's hopeful face, then at Claire, whose expression gave nothing away. I'll see what I can do, he promised. As he left for work, he found himself both irritated and intrigued by Claire Thompson. She was clearly overstepping, and yet, Eliza seemed happier than she had in months. Maybe he could spare 15 minutes for stargazing just this once. Maxwell surprised himself by leaving the office at 7 that evening. He canceled his dinner with investors, citing a family matter. His assistant had given him a curious look. He never canceled meetings for family reasons. As the private elevator climbed toward the penthouse, Maxwell felt strangely nervous. What if Eliza was disappointed in the stars? What if Claire had built up expectations he couldn't fulfill in 15 minutes of stargazing? The doors opened and he stepped into unexpected noise. Music was playing. Not the classical pieces Eliza's previous tutors had selected for cognitive development, but something upbeat with drums and guitars. He followed the sound to the large covered balcony off the main living room. Dad. Eliza's face lit up when she saw him. She sat in her wheelchair near the glass barrier that enclosed the space, wrapped in a thick blanket despite the balcony's heating system. You came. I said I would, he replied, trying not to sound defensive. Claire stood nearby, adjusting what looked like a small telescope. She wore a puffy jacket against the October chill. Perfect timing, she said, checking her watch. The sky's clear and we've got about 20 minutes before the city lights make it too hard to see anything good. Maxwell walked to his daughter, bending to kiss her forehead. Having fun? Eliza nodded enthusiastically. We had pizza for dinner. Claire says it's brain food. Maxwell raised an eyebrow at Claire, who shrugged. Technically, all food is brain food, but pizza makes learning more enjoyable. Dad, come look. Eliza pointed to the telescope. Claire set it up for Perseus. That's her favorite constellation because he rescued someone everyone thought was doomed. Andromeda, Claire supplied, stepping back from the telescope. All yours, Mr. Harrington. Maxwell bent to look through the eyepiece, seeing nothing but blurry darkness. You need to adjust it for your height, Claire said, reaching past him to turn a knob. Her hand brushed his shoulder, a casual touch that nonetheless felt like an intrusion into his carefully maintained personal space. Suddenly, points of light came into focus. I see it, he said, though he had no idea which stars formed Perseus. See the bright one at the top? That's Mirfak, Eliza explained, and the cluster below is called the Alpha Persei cluster. Claire says they're all moving through space together like a family. Maxwell straightened up, oddly touched by his daughter's excitement. When did you learn all this? Today? We've been studying the sky all afternoon. Claire says people used to navigate ships just by looking at stars. Can you imagine? He glanced at Claire, who was watching Eliza with a small smile. It's amazing what people can do when they have to, she said. For the next half hour, well beyond the promised 15 minutes, Maxwell stayed on the balcony with them. Eliza pointed out constellations, explaining their mythology with dramatic flair. When a satellite passed overhead, she tracked it across the sky, waving as if the astronauts inside might see her. Eventually, the city's glow washed out the fainter stars, and the evening chill deepened. Time to head in, Claire announced, starting to pack up the telescope. 5 more minutes? Eliza pleaded. Your hands are getting cold, Claire replied. We'll come out again tomorrow if it's clear. Maxwell expected a protest, but Eliza nodded, accepting the boundary without argument. That was new. Usually she negotiated every limit her caretakers set. As they moved inside, Maxwell noticed that the apartment had been subtly rearranged. Furniture had been shifted to create wider paths for Eliza's wheelchair. Her art supplies, once kept in a cabinet, were now displayed on low shelves where she could reach them independently. You've been busy, he commented to Claire as Eliza went ahead to her room. Small changes make a big difference, she replied. Eliza needs to feel this is her home, not a hospital room she lives in. These changes weren't approved, he said, keeping his voice low. Claire met his gaze directly. Do you want me to ask permission for every little thing? Or do you want me to help your daughter? Before he could answer, Eliza called from her room. Claire, I need help with my pajamas. Coming, Claire called back. To Maxwell, she added. By the way, she stood for 12 seconds during therapy today. The therapist made a note of it in her file. As she walked away, Maxwell felt off balance. 12 seconds. It didn't sound like much, but it was longer than Eliza had ever managed before. Later, after Claire had left for the day, Maxwell sat beside Eliza's bed for their nightly talk. Did you like the stars, Dad? She asked sleepily. I did, he said honestly. Thank you for showing them to me. Claire says we're made of star stuff. That billions of years ago, all the bits that make us were floating around in space. Eliza yawned. Isn't that cool? Even my broken parts came from stars. Maxwell felt something catch in his chest. Your parts aren't broken, Firefly. They're just different. That's what Claire says too. Eliza's eyes drifted closed. She says different isn't broken, it's just different. After Eliza fell asleep, Maxwell went to his office and pulled up the security footage from the day. He watched Claire and Eliza at physical therapy, noticing how Claire turned the exercises into games. Instead of the clinical counting that previous caretakers had used, Claire challenged Eliza to stand as long as it takes to say the name of every planet, or until we guess what Mrs. Winters is cooking for dinner. He watched as Eliza, laughing, pushed herself to stand a few seconds longer than she had before. Later footage showed them in the library, where Claire had placed cushions on the floor. To his astonishment, Maxwell watched as Claire helped Eliza down from her wheelchair to sit on the cushions. They spread books and maps around them, creating what looked like an expedition planning session. Maxwell poured himself a drink and continued watching. In every interaction, Claire treated Eliza not as a patient to be cared for, but as a capable person who just needed different approaches. She never did things for Eliza that his daughter could do herself, even if it took longer. And she spoke to her without the condescending tone other adults often used. 3 days into the 1-week trial, and already things were changing. The next morning, Maxwell deliberately arrived at the breakfast table early. Claire looked surprised to see him there. "Good morning," she said cautiously. "I watched the security footage from yesterday," he said, not bothering with pleasantries. Claire's expression didn't change. "And?" "You had my daughter sitting on the floor." "Yes. Her doctors advise against that. It puts pressure on her spine." Claire poured herself a cup of coffee. "Her doctors advise against a lot of things, Mr. Harrington. But staying in one position all day isn't good for anyone. Eliza needs to experience different positions and environments. Without medical supervision. I was supervising. And we didn't do anything that caused her pain." Maxwell studied her, trying to understand this woman who seemed so sure of herself. "Where did you learn to work with children like Eliza?" Claire smiled slightly. "Children like Eliza don't exist, Mr. Harrington. Each child is unique." "You know what I mean." She set down her coffee. "I started as a physical therapy assistant. Worked in pediatrics for several years before going private, but most of what I know I learned by listening to the children themselves. They'll tell you what they need if you pay attention." "And what does my daughter need?" he asked, genuinely curious. "The same thing every child needs, to be seen as a person, not a condition." Claire leaned forward. "Eliza doesn't want to be fixed, Mr. Harrington. She wants to be included." Before he could respond, Eliza's voice called from down the hall. "Claire, are you here?" "In the kitchen with your dad," Claire called back. The whir of Eliza's motorized wheelchair approached. She appeared in the doorway, already dressed, her hair neatly brushed. Another change. Previously, she'd needed help with her morning routine. "You're both here," she said, clearly delighted. "Dad, Claire says we can try water therapy today. There's a heated pool in the building, right?" Maxwell nodded. The pool on the 40th floor was rarely used by residents. He'd had it built as a selling point for the luxury apartments below his penthouse. "Your wheelchair can't go in water," he pointed out. "I know that, silly." Eliza rolled her eyes. "Claire has a special float thing. She says water will support my weight so I can move my legs more easily." Maxwell looked at Claire, who nodded. "Aquatherapy is standard practice. I'm surprised it hasn't been part of her treatment before." "The logistics seemed complicated," he admitted. "Most things worth doing are," Claire replied. She turned to Eliza. "Breakfast first, then we'll go over the plan for the pool." As they ate together, Maxwell found himself drawn into their conversation. Claire asked Eliza questions about what she wanted to learn, how she wanted to grow stronger. Not once did they talk about her condition as a limitation, only as a reality to work around. For the first time, Maxwell began to wonder if he'd been part of the problem all these years. Had his focus on finding a cure kept him from seeing what Eliza could already do? "Can you come to the pool with us, Dad?" Eliza asked suddenly. Maxwell hesitated. He had 3 meetings scheduled, 2 contract reviews, and a conference call with Tokyo. "Please?" Eliza pressed. "Just for a little while. Claire says it's going to be my first time feeling almost weightless." Maxwell looked at his daughter's hopeful face. Then at Claire, who was carefully buttering toast, pretending not to listen. "I'll be there," he said, surprising himself again, "for as long as I can." The smile that bloomed across Eliza's face was worth every meeting he would have to reschedule. "Day 4, Claire murmured, as Eliza turned her attention back to breakfast. "Still think this was a mistake?" Maxwell didn't answer, but for the first time since hiring Claire Thompson, he was beginning to think it might have been the best decision he'd made in years. The building's pool was deserted when they arrived. Maxwell had called ahead to ensure privacy, something Claire hadn't asked for but seemed to appreciate. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, dancing across water so still it looked like blue glass. "It's beautiful," Eliza whispered, her wheelchair stopping at the pool's edge. She leaned forward, looking at her reflection rippling on the surface. Maxwell stood awkwardly in the suit he'd worn to breakfast, unsure of his role. Claire had already changed into a modest swimsuit covered by a t-shirt and shorts. She moved with purpose, setting up equipment he didn't recognize. "What's that?" he asked, pointing to what looked like a small inflatable chair. "Support float," Claire explained. "It'll help Eliza stay upright in the water while leaving her legs free to move." She turned to Eliza. "Ready for your swimming outfit?" Eliza nodded eagerly. Maxwell realized he'd never seen his daughter in a swimsuit. He'd installed a special shower in her bathroom years ago, but swimming had never been considered an option. "I'll wait outside," he said, suddenly feeling intrusive. "No need," Claire replied. "We're all set." She unzipped a bag to reveal what looked like a child's wetsuit. "This will keep you warm even in heated water," she explained to Eliza. "And it provides a bit of compression, which helps with body awareness." Maxwell watched as Claire helped Eliza change, maintaining his daughter's dignity with practiced efficiency. There were no awkward pauses or embarrassed looks, just calm, matter-of-fact assistance. "Now for the tricky part," Claire said, wheeling Eliza to a chairlift at the shallow end of the pool. "This will lower you into the water. It might feel strange at first." Maxwell stepped forward. "Is that safe?" Claire looked at him steadily. "Yes, I've done this hundreds of times." "It's okay, Dad," Eliza added. "I'm not scared," he nodded, stepping back to give them space. Claire secured Eliza in the lift chair, double-checking the straps before operating the controls. Slowly, the chair began to descend toward the water. "Tell me what you're feeling," Claire instructed Eliza. "It's like flying," Eliza replied, her voice trembling with excitement. The chair touched the water and Eliza gasped. "It's warm. Perfect temperature," Claire agreed, now stepping into the pool via the stairs. The water reached her waist as she waded toward Eliza. "Keep breathing normally." Maxwell found himself holding his breath as the chair lowered Eliza deeper into the pool. Water rose to her chest, and for a moment panic flashed across her face. "Claire?" Her voice wobbled. "I'm right here," Claire assured her, reaching her side. "You're doing great. The chair will stop in a few seconds, and then I'll help you into the float." True to her word, the chair stopped with the water at Eliza's shoulders. Claire deftly unbuckled the straps and, with gentle movements, transferred Eliza to the specialized float. "How does that feel?" Claire asked. Eliza's eyes were wide. "Weird, good weird. I feel lighter." "Water supports about 90% of your body weight," Claire explained. "That's why it's easier to move here." Maxwell stepped closer to the edge, his shoes clicking against the tile. Eliza looked up at him, face glowing. "Dad, my legs don't feel so heavy." Something twisted in Maxwell's chest, joy mixed with an inexplicable sadness. How had he never thought to try this before? How many other experiences had he denied his daughter by focusing only on treatments and cures? "Watch this," Claire said, supporting Eliza's float with one hand while placing her other hand under Eliza's knees. "I'm going to move your legs a bit, and I want you to tell me what you feel." Slowly, she guided Eliza's legs through simple movements, bending, straightening, gentle kicks. Eliza's face registered surprise, then delight. "I can feel them moving. It's like they remember what to do." Maxwell couldn't tear his eyes away. His daughter, who had spent most of her life in a wheelchair, was moving in water with something approaching freedom. The smile on her face was unlike anything he'd seen before. "Mr. Harrington," Claire called, breaking into his thoughts. "Would you like to join us?" He looked down at his expensive suit, his polished shoes. "I'm not exactly dressed for swimming." "Not to swim," Claire clarified. "Just to feel what Eliza's experiencing. You can roll up your pants and sit at the edge." Before he could overthink it, Maxwell was removing his shoes and socks, rolling up his suit pants to his knees. He sat at the pool's edge, lowering his feet into the warm water. "Come closer," Claire guided, maneuvering Eliza's float toward him. "Eliza's going to show you her new kicks." His daughter beamed up at him. "Watch, Dad." With Claire's minimal support, Eliza moved her legs through the water, creating small splashes. The movements were limited, uncoordinated, but undeniably intentional. His throat tightened as he watched her exertion, her concentration, her joy. "That's amazing, Firefly," he managed. "Want to help?" Claire asked him. Before he could answer, his phone rang, the special tone he'd assigned to urgent business calls. Habit made him reach for it before he even thought. "Sorry," he said, checking the screen. "It's the Tokyo deal." Claire's expression remained neutral. "Of course." But Eliza's face fell, the light dimming in her eyes. She'd seen this before. her father choosing work over her moments of triumph. Maxwell looked from the phone to his daughter, water droplets glistening on her eyelashes as she blinked rapidly. "Mr. Howard," he said into the phone, "I'm going to have to call you back in an hour. I'm in the middle of something important." He ended the call and slipped the phone into his jacket pocket, which he then removed entirely and placed carefully aside. "Now," he said, turning back to Eliza, whose smile had returned, "what can I do to help?" For the next 45 minutes, Maxwell remained at the pool's edge, following Claire's instructions. He held Eliza's hands while she practiced floating on her back. He cheered as she moved her arms through water, propelling herself a few inches at a time. He listened as Claire explained how water therapy could strengthen muscles that typically bore too little or too much weight on land. Most importantly, he watched his daughter experience a new kind of freedom. Freedom from the constraints of gravity, from the limitations she'd lived with for 10 years. "I think that's enough for today," Claire eventually said, noting Eliza's fatigue. "Let's end while it's still fun. 5 more minutes?" Eliza pleaded, using her familiar negotiation tactic. "Next time," Claire promised. "Your body needs to rest now so it can remember what it learned today." To Maxwell's surprise, Eliza accepted this with only a small sigh. "Okay, but we're coming back tomorrow, right?" "Day after tomorrow," Claire corrected. "Tomorrow we rest and process. Maybe do some drawing to remember how this felt." The transfer back to the wheelchair was handled with the same careful efficiency. Once Eliza was settled, wrapped in a plush towel, her wet hair combed back, Claire excused herself to change. "Dad?" Eliza looked up at him, her expression serious. "Is this what walking feels like? Being in the water?" Maxwell crouched beside her wheelchair. "I don't know, Firefly. Maybe a little bit." "I liked it," she said simply. "I felt normal." The word hit him like a physical blow. Had his daughter never felt normal before? Had all his efforts to help her only reinforced how different she was? "You are normal," he said fiercely. "Just your own kind of normal." Eliza smiled at him, reaching out to pat his hand as if he were the child needing reassurance. "I know, Dad. That's what Claire says too." Later that day, Maxwell canceled his remaining meetings and worked from home. He sat in his office, door ajar, so he could hear Eliza and Claire in the living room. They were creating an art project, something about the experience in the pool. Occasionally, Eliza's laughter floated down the hallway, light and carefree. His phone buzzed with an incoming email. Dr. Winters, Eliza's longtime physician, was requesting a meeting to discuss concerns about recent changes in Eliza's care routine. Apparently, Mrs. Winters had reported Claire's unconventional approaches. Maxwell started to type a response, then stopped. 5 days ago, he would have immediately scheduled the meeting, eager for the doctor to confirm his suspicions that Claire was overstepping. Now he wasn't so sure. He closed his laptop and walked to the living room. Eliza and Claire sat at a low table surrounded by art supplies. Large sheets of paper were covered with blue paint swirls, glitter, and what appeared to be Eliza's handprints in various colors. "What's all this?" he asked. Eliza looked up proudly. "We're making a memory map of the pool. These blue parts are where I felt the most floaty, and the handprints show where I could move by myself." Claire smiled at him over Eliza's head. "Art helps process new physical experiences. It creates neural connections between the body's memory and the brain's understanding." It sounded plausible, but Maxwell suspected Claire was making it up. Yet he couldn't argue with the results. Eliza was engaged, happy, and talking about her body in a positive way. "It looks wonderful," he said, meaning it. "When you're done, maybe we could have dinner together." "All 3 of us?" Eliza's eyes widened. "Really? You'll be home for dinner?" "I'm home now, aren't I?" he pointed out. Claire stood, wiping paint from her hands. "I should probably head out. You two could use some time together." "No," Maxwell surprised himself by saying. "Stay. Please, I'd like to hear more about your plans for Eliza if you're willing to share them." Claire studied him as if trying to determine his motives. Finally, she nodded. "All right. Dinner it is. Can we eat on the balcony?" Eliza asked. "Claire says eating outside makes food taste better." Maxwell laughed. "Does she now? Well, I suppose we'll have to test that theory." As they cleaned up the art supplies together, Maxwell caught Claire watching him with an unreadable expression. "What?" he asked quietly while Eliza was distracted. "Nothing," she replied. "Just This is day 5, Mr. Harrington. You said 1 week. I did, he acknowledged, and he looked at his daughter, happily sorting markers by color, humming to herself. I think we should revisit that timeline. Claire's smile was small but genuine. I think so too. 2 weeks later, Maxwell sat in his home office on a conference call, half listening to his executives debate quarterly projections. Through the open door, he could hear Eliza and Claire in the living room, working on what they called transition exercises, movements designed to help Eliza shift from her wheelchair to other surfaces more independently. Mr. Harrington? A voice from his laptop pulled his attention back. Your thoughts on the proposal? I need to review the numbers more carefully, he said, a response that had become his standard way to buy time when he wasn't fully focused on work. Let's table this until tomorrow. After ending the call, Maxwell walked to the living room. Claire had placed cushions on the floor near the sofa, creating a soft landing area. Eliza was practicing moving from her wheelchair to the sofa with minimal assistance. Look, Dad, she called when she spotted him. Watch this. With careful movements and obvious effort, Eliza braced her arms on the sofa and wheelchair, lifting herself just enough to slide across the gap. Claire stood nearby, hands hovering but not touching, ready to help only if absolutely necessary. When Eliza landed safely on the sofa, her face broke into a triumphant smile. I did it. That's 3 times in a row. Impressive, Maxwell said, meaning it. 3 weeks ago, such a transfer would have required another adult lifting her completely. We've been working on upper body strength, Claire explained. Eliza's getting stronger every day. Eliza nodded enthusiastically. Claire says soon we can try something bigger. Right, Claire? An expression Maxwell couldn't quite read crossed Claire's face. We've talked about this, Eliza, 1 step at a time. But you said, I said we'd discuss it with your father when the time was right. Claire interrupted gently. Maxwell looked between them. Discuss what? Eliza and Claire exchanged glances, some silent communication passing between them that made Maxwell realize just how close they'd become. Well, Claire began carefully, Eliza has been making incredible progress with her strength and mobility. I can see that, Maxwell agreed, and we've been talking about taking the next step. A bigger challenge. Maxwell felt a familiar tension creep into his shoulders. What kind of challenge? Eliza couldn't contain herself any longer. The park, Dad. I want to go to the park. The words hung in the air between them. Central Park, just across the street, yet a world away from their controlled penthouse environment. Absolutely not, Maxwell said automatically. It's too unpredictable, too many variables, too many people. Dad! Eliza's face fell. You didn't even think about it. I don't need to think about it. Your doctors have been clear about your limitations. But I'm stronger now, Eliza insisted. Claire thinks I can do it. Maxwell turned to Claire, who met his gaze steadily. You've been planning this? Behind my back? Not planning, she corrected. Discussing possibilities. And not behind your back. We're talking to you about it now. It's too dangerous, Maxwell insisted. Claire's expression remained calm. What exactly are you afraid will happen, Mr. Harrington? The question caught him off guard. What was he afraid of? That Eliza might fall? That she might get hurt? Or was it something else? Something he didn't want to admit even to himself. I need to get back to work, he said abruptly, retreating to his office. He tried to focus on spreadsheets, but his mind kept circling back to the conversation. The park. Such a simple request for most children, but for Eliza. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Claire stood in the doorway. May I come in? She asked. Maxwell nodded stiffly. Claire took a seat across from him. Eliza's resting. The exercises tired her out. Is that supposed to reassure me about her readiness for the park? No, it's just information. Claire leaned forward. Mr. Harrington, in the 3 weeks I've been here, Eliza has made more progress than in the previous year. Not just physically, but emotionally. She's starting to believe in possibilities. And that's good, isn't it? Would you rather she accept limitations without question? Maxwell sighed, rubbing his temples. You don't understand. I've spent 10 years trying to protect her from disappointment, from a world that isn't built for her needs. With respect, sir, you've been protecting yourself too. His head snapped up. Excuse me? As long as Eliza stays in this penthouse, you don't have to face how the world might treat her. You don't have to watch people stare or ask inappropriate questions. You don't have to advocate for accessible spaces or deal with places she can't go. The accuracy of her words stung. That's not fair. Maybe not, Claire acknowledged. But ask yourself this. Are you keeping Eliza inside to protect her or to protect yourself from seeing her struggle? Maxwell stood up, moving to the window that overlooked the park. The autumn leaves created a patchwork of red and gold below. How many times had Eliza pressed her nose against the glass, watching other children play? What exactly are you proposing? He asked finally. A short visit. Early morning when it's less crowded. We'd take her specialized wheelchair, the one with the larger wheels for rough terrain. I've already scouted a path that's accessible and relatively flat. He turned to face her. You've been to the park? Claire nodded. Several times in the past week. During my lunch breaks. I wouldn't suggest this if I hadn't done my homework. Of course she had. In 3 weeks, Claire had proven herself to be nothing if not thorough. And if something goes wrong, he pressed. Define wrong, Claire countered. If Eliza gets tired, we come home. If the path is too rough, we find another one or we turn back. If she falls, and which is unlikely given the wheelchair we'd use, we help her up. Put that way, it sounded so simple. Yet the thought still filled him with dread. I can't, he said quietly. I'm sorry. Claire studied him for a long moment. May I ask you something personal, Mr. Harrington? He nodded warily. When was the last time you took a risk, a real risk, where you weren't sure of the outcome? The question hit him harder than expected. In business, he took calculated risks daily, but they were backed by data, by probabilities, by safety nets. In his personal life, he couldn't remember the last true risk he'd taken. That's what I thought, Claire said, reading his expression. Eliza needs to learn that life involves risks, but that doesn't make it not worth living. She stood to leave, pausing at the door. She's asking to see the ducks at the pond. That's all. Not climb a mountain or cross a desert. Just see some ducks swimming in water. Maybe throw them some bread. Is that really too much to ask? After she left, Maxwell remained at the window, watching the tiny figures of people strolling through the park. Parents with strollers, joggers, dog walkers, normal people doing normal things. That evening, when he went to say goodnight to Eliza, she was quieter than usual. Still mad at me? He asked, sitting on the edge of her bed. She shook her head. Not mad, just sad because of the park, because you don't think I can do it. Her blue eyes, so like her mother's, looked up at him. Claire believes I can. Why don't you? The question echoed in his mind long after Eliza had fallen asleep. Why didn't he believe? When had he stopped hoping for more for his daughter? The next morning, Maxwell canceled all his meetings. When Claire arrived, he was waiting in the kitchen, 2 travel mugs of coffee on the counter. Good morning, she said cautiously, noting his casual clothes, jeans and a sweater instead of his usual suit. I've been thinking about what you said, he began without preamble. About risks, Claire set down her bag, and I'd like to try your park idea. Her face broke into a smile. Really? With conditions, he added quickly. We go at dawn before the crowds. We take security discreetly, and we come back immediately if Eliza shows any signs of fatigue or discomfort. Of course, Claire agreed. When? Today, Maxwell said. Before I lose my nerve, Claire's eyes widened. Today? We haven't prepared Eliza, haven't packed the right equipment. You said you'd scouted the path, he reminded her. And I had the terrain wheelchair brought up from storage last night. Yes, but, Claire, he interrupted, if we wait for perfect conditions, we'll never go. Isn't that what you've been trying to teach me? She laughed softly, using my own philosophy against me. Well played. She glanced toward Eliza's room. She's still sleeping. Let's wake her up, Maxwell suggested. With the news. The joy on Eliza's face when they told her was something Maxwell knew he would remember forever. She couldn't stop asking questions. What would they see? Were there really ducks? Could she bring bread? How close could she get to the trees? An hour later, as the sun began to rise over the city, Maxwell found himself standing at the private entrance to his building, watching as Claire expertly maneuvered Eliza's specialized wheelchair onto the sidewalk. His daughter wore a warm coat, a hat pulled over her ears against the autumn chill, and an expression of such anticipation it made his throat tight. Ready? Claire asked them both. Eliza nodded eagerly. Maxwell managed a tense smile. The short journey across the street felt monumental. Each bump in the sidewalk made Maxwell wince, but Claire navigated them skillfully. Security personnel walked at a distance, allowing them privacy while remaining watchful. And then suddenly they were there. Not just looking at the park through glass, but in it. Surrounded by trees whose leaves rustled in the morning breeze, the path beneath them changed from concrete to packed earth and fine gravel. "Look, Dad." Eliza pointed upward. "The trees are so big." Maxwell followed her gaze. From the penthouse, the trees had looked like miniatures in an architect's model. Here they towered overhead, their branches creating patterns against the lightening sky. They moved deeper into the park, following Claire's pre-planned route. The wheelchair handled the terrain better than Maxwell had expected. Each new sight brought fresh exclamations from Eliza, a squirrel darting across their path, the mist rising from dew-covered grass, the unexpected colors of flowers planted along the walkway. When they reached the small pond, Eliza fell silent, overcome. Ducks glided across the water's surface, leaving rippled trails behind them. The city sound seemed muffled here, replaced by chirping birds and the gentle splash of water. "It's better than I imagined," Eliza whispered. Claire handed her a small bag of bread pieces. "Would you like to feed them?" Eliza nodded, too emotional for words. Claire positioned the wheelchair at the pond's edge, where a small platform extended over the water. Carefully, Eliza tossed a piece of bread. Ducks immediately swam toward it, quacking excitedly. Maxwell stood back, watching his daughter experience something so simple, yet so profound. Claire caught his eye and smiled, not her usual reserved smile, but one of genuine happiness. "Thank you," he mouthed silently. She nodded, turning her attention back to Eliza, who was giggling as the ducks competed for bread. In that moment, watching his daughter's face illuminated by dawn light, surrounded by a world she was experiencing for the first time, Maxwell understood what Claire had been trying to show him all along. Life wasn't about avoiding risks or controlling every variable. It was about these moments. Pure joy, discovered in the simplest things, made all the more precious because they weren't guaranteed. "Dad, come try," Eliza called, holding out the bread bag. Maxwell joined them at the water's edge, accepting a piece of bread from his daughter's hand. As he tossed it to the waiting ducks, he made a silent promise, to himself, to Eliza, and to the memory of her mother, that this would be just the first of many such moments. The first of many walks, many risks, many joys, not the last.